Why was everyone laughing? The after-action review room was packed wall to wall, uniforms pressed tight in rows, boots drumming faintly against tile as men waited for a story they already thought they knew. SEALs in the front, Marines and soldiers along the sides, officers by the walls, each face carrying that skeptical look that comes when pride masks curiosity. The colonel cleared his throat, adjusted his notes, and spoke the name of the one who would lead the briefing. Specialist Nora Reyes. For half a second, silence. Then came the ripple, a chuckle here, a smirk there, a whisper loud enough to sting. A clerk, someone muttered. Maybe she stapled the battle report. A Marine captain leaned back, grinned sharp, and said just low enough to carry, 361 nearly died, and they send an office girl to tell it. Nora stood at the side, folder in hand, pressed sleeves, posture steady. She had no ranger tab stitched to her shoulder, no chest full of ribbons clattering against fabric, no battle scars anyone could see. Just a name tape. Just the quiet presence of a soldier who'd lived too long in the shadows. She stepped forward anyway. The remote clicked in her hand, and the first slide glowed against the wall, jagged ridgelines, a valley like teeth. Her voice came low, even. This is the ground that tried to end you. The laughter thinned. Silence crawled in, sharp, unwilling. Because no one expected her voice to carry weight. No one expected her to hold the story. And yet, in her chest, she carried the kind of memory that could replay a valley second by second. But that memory began far earlier, long before the ambush, before the chaos, before the 361 men found themselves pinned against rock and dirt with death pouring down from both ridges. It began in quiet. Nora Reyes had always been small, 5'3" on a good day, the kind of frame others overlooked in a crowd. She grew up in a border town where Spanish and English wove together like strands of wire. At home, her mother's voice in Spanish. At school, English textbooks. On the streets, both tongues colliding at once. By 12, she was translating bills for neighbors, letters for shopkeepers, questions from police. It was in those moments she learned something people much older never did. Panic kills clarity. A wrong phrase, a stuttered word, could close a clinic or cost someone a paycheck. Her gift wasn't loudness. It was steadiness. Slow breath, clear tone, words placed like anchors in a storm. That gift followed her into uniform. On paper, she was assigned to administrative work, a clerk in S1, the office that moved signatures, processed leave forms, routed awards. Her name appeared in memos, not mission logs. When someone said get raise, it meant a missing file, not a rifle. The jokes followed her everywhere. She belongs in the office. Clerks don't fight wars. If the enemy comes, she'll beat them with staplers. Nora heard it all. She never answered. What they didn't see, what no one saw, was what she did when the barracks went dark and the world quieted. She studied. She listened. She traced the sound of radios through walls, catching clipped exchanges no one else cared to hear. By her second year, she could recite call signs and alternate channels like some soldiers memorized football scores. She whispered brevity codes under her breath until they came out smooth. She drew valleys and ridgelines on scraps of paper, rehearsing fire missions in silence. The TOC, the Tactical Operations Center, became her secret classroom. While others played cards or scrolled phones, she leaned in close, listening as comms NCOs barked signals, walked antennas, corrected static. She carried them coffee just to stand in their orbit. They laughed at her at first. The clerk wants to play operator, but she kept showing up, kept asking, kept learning. And slowly, the rhythm of the net began to live inside her bones. Still, no one noticed. No medals filled her chest. No stories of her name echoed in halls. She wasn't the one kicking doors or fast-roping into night. She was background, polite, efficient, forgettable. Yet every hour in the TOC was rehearsal. She timed how long it took for a call to be answered. She studied which leaders grew calm when chaos hit and which cracked under it. She traced layers of battle, ground, air, comms, and learned how one could rebuild when another collapsed. She didn't need credit, she needed readiness. There were hints, of course. A sergeant once handed her a busted radio as a joke. Fix this with a paperclip, clerk. 30 minutes later, she passed it back working. He stared like he'd seen a ghost. Lucky guess. Another time, during an exercise, she corrected a lieutenant's grid before it went out. She had memorized the map so well, she spotted his mistake instantly. The fire mission would have landed on friendlies. He flushed red, snapped at her to stay in her lane. The unit never knew she had saved them from their own misfire. These moments faded into pencil marks, erased by laughter and dismissal. But she carried them quietly, proof that when the day came, she could hold the line. What no one understood was this: Nora Reyes wasn't waiting for recognition. She was waiting for the valley. And it came. It began with silence, the kind of silence that precedes violence. A column of 361 Navy SEALs and attachments moved through a dirt corridor flanked by jagged ridges. Morning haze smothered the slopes, hiding eyes and barrels above. Then the first shot cracked, from the east ridge. Then the west. Then both. Machine guns stitched the air, mortars pounded the dirt, and within seconds the valley was a cage. Inside the TOC, screens lit up with icons. Blue markers for friendlies, red multiplying like disease. A staff captain whispered, "God help them." The battalion major barked into the net, "Trident Actual status." The reply came ragged, pinned on 3 sides, multiple wounded, ammo low. Another analyst muttered, "They walked into a kill box." The air officer shook his head. F-16s are 20 minutes out. Rules of engagement: they can't fire inside 100 meters. They're dead if we don't do something else. And then came the strike that broke everything. The primary radio operator, the lifeline for all 361 men, took a round through the chest. His last call cut off mid-sentence. The net bled into static. Chaos flooded in. On the other end, voices shouted over each other. Coordinates jumbled. East Ridge calls drowned under West Ridge screams. "We're blind here," someone yelled. Blind. It wasn't just the ground that was lost. The air was lost too. The net itself had collapsed. Nora sat at the edge of the TOC, clipboard in hand, logging timestamps. She froze only for a second. The spare handset hung on the wall. Her fingers twitched. She knew what to do. She always knew. But behind her, the officers snapped first. "Who's got the net? Get another operator. We can't pass control to a clerk. She'll freeze." A sergeant laughed under his breath. "What's Reyes going to do? File the enemy to death?" Another piled on. "She's a paper pusher. You want her handling fire missions." Even the major spat it out sharp. "Not her, anyone but her." The insults landed like blows, sandbags trying to bury her where she stood. Nora didn't argue. She didn't plead. She didn't explain the hours of memorized frequencies, the nights tracing ridgelines by lamplight, the whispered codes in empty rooms. She just reached forward, lifted the spare handset and pressed the key. "Trident Actual, this is TOC. Confirm you can read me." For half a second, only static. Then a reply, ragged but alive. "TOC copy, who's calling?" She answered with nothing but the truth. "Specialist Reyes, I have the net." The room rippled like glass shattering. Heads whipped toward her. The sergeant who mocked her hissed, "You're insane. Put that down before you get someone killed." But then another voice bled through the static. "Copy, Reyes. We'll take anyone who can hear us right now." And with that, the net found a heartbeat again. The first test came instantly. Enemy mortars, south slope, grid 229,578. Need counter fire now. Maps scattered across the TOC table, officers fumbling with overlays. Nora didn't look down. She had already memorized that valley, sketching it in pencil weeks ago when no one was watching. She keyed the mic. "Roger. South slope grid 229,578. Adjust fire mission. Shift east 50 meters. danger close authorized. The fire support NCO stared. How the hell does she know that grid cold? Someone muttered, she guessed. Then the ground shook. The shell landed exactly where the mortars had been. Silence. Then the SEALs reply, good effect on target, enemy mortars neutralized. The TOC went quiet. But doubt dies hard. The major snapped. Don't get cocky. One lucky call doesn't make you an operator. The sergeant piled on. She'll choke when it counts. Watch. As if on cue, another desperate call cut through. East Ridge. Multiple RPG teams, 50 meters. The F-16s were still minutes away. No drones overhead. No help coming. Only the net. Every eye in the TOC drilled into her, waiting for her to fold. Nora closed her eyes once, exhaled slow, the same calm she had practiced since childhood. Panic had no place here. She keyed the mic again. Trident Actual, mark position with IR. I'll walk artillery north 50 meters at a time. Keep your heads down. There was a pause, then, copy that, raise, we'll hold. Artillery thundered. Her corrections came crisp, exact. Shift 20 north, fire, shift 20 more, fire. Each round shaved closer, carving survival out of chaos. The smirks began to fade. The pencil tapping stopped. A whisper broke in the room, low but certain. She's not supposed to know how to do this. And yet she did. The battle was no longer just on the ridges. It was in the room, too. Belief was breaking. And Nora Reyes, the clerk they had dismissed, wasn't letting go of the net. How long could a voice hold back death? That was the unspoken question in the TOC. Every eye locked on her, waiting for the slip, the mistake, the crack in her calm that would prove them right, that she didn't belong on the net. But the radio didn't care who mocked her, and neither did the SEALs on the ground. Trident Actual, shift fire 30 meters north. Break, hold position, stand by for next correction. Her cadence was crisp, clipped, deliberate. No stutter, no hesitation. The fire support officer muttered almost to himself. She sounds like she's been doing this for years. The sergeant who had mocked her earlier leaned forward, arms crossed, frown deepening. He wanted her to fail. He needed her to fail. Because if she didn't, if she kept this up, it meant the hierarchy he trusted was built on sand. Then another desperate call bled through. Multiple hostiles massing on the West Ridge. Grid 229,659, less than 100 meters. Everyone in the TOC froze. Less than 100 meters was a no-fire zone. Too danger close for jets, too close for artillery without risking their own men. The air officer shook his head. Jets can't touch that. They'll die there. Nora didn't flinch. Trident Actual, copy West Ridge grid 229,659. Recommend suppression with 60 mic. Adjusting fire. Stand by. She rattled off corrections like she'd been doing it all her life. Left 25, fire. Drop 10, fire. The howitzers answered. The ridge erupted. The explosions marched across rock like teeth snapping shut. The SEALs' reply came back ragged but steady. Ridge suppressed, corridor opening. The officers stared like they had just witnessed physics bend. The colonel's voice cut sharp. Specialist, how do you know those ridges by name? Nora didn't look up from the map in her head. Studied them, sir. She didn't explain that she had walked those folds in imagination at 3 in the morning, tracing shadows until she could see them with eyes closed. They wouldn't have believed her anyway. The silence pressed thick until another frantic call shattered it. East slope, enemy assault 70 meters, we can't. The voice drowned under gunfire. Panic threatened the net again. Nora's voice cut clean through. Trident, designate with spark. Confirm IR marker east slope 70 meters. A beat of static, then spark lit, solid copy. She shifted artillery one last time, threading explosions between friendly strobes and hostile flashes. The radio fell silent. Then the SEAL commander's voice broke through, steady, clipped. Target neutralized. Zero fratricide. Good work. The TOC stared. This wasn't luck. This wasn't guessing. She was shaping the fight. The major muttered under his breath, "That's not possible. She's just repeating what she's heard before." But another officer answered quietly, "Then how come they're still alive?" The insults found less oxygen now. Doubt still lingered, but it was weakening. The room was changing. And outside, the valley roared. Gunfire clawed at stone, mortars shredded dirt, and 361 men clung to shallow cover, waiting for a calm voice to carry them through. Nora Reyes had become that voice. Still inside her chest, the weight pressed hard. She wasn't trained for this. Not officially. No badge, no certificate. Just hours of stolen learning, scraps of knowledge pieced together like contraband. And now lives real lives balanced on whether she got it right. Her thumb hovered over the transmit key. She thought of her father's face back in Texas, lined from years of labor. He'd always said she had a stubborn streak that scared him. "One day you'll carry something too heavy," he'd warned. She hadn't believed him. Now she wondered if this was what he meant. But there was no time for doubt. Another voice cracked across the net, higher pitched, younger, trembling. "This is Trident 2. We can't move. We're cut off. They're closing in, out of ammo. We can't." The TOC froze. Panic on the net spread like blood in water. One weak voice could unravel everything. Nora keyed up, her voice low, steady. "Trident 2, breathe." Static, only heavy breathing. She repeated firmer. "Breathe, say again slowly, I have you." The silence stretched, then steadied. Pinned north slope. 2 enemy squads, maybe more. Grid 229,582. "Solid copy," she replied. "Hold position. I'm walking fire uphill ahead of you. Stay low, you're not alone." Her corrections came like a scalpel. "Shift 10 north, fire. Shift 20 more, fire." Each detonation cracked closer, her voice carving space for the SEALs to crawl forward. The young officer came back, steadier now. "Copy, we're moving, thank you." Nora didn't answer. She just kept the net alive. The TOC was utterly still. The same sergeant who had mocked her with stapler jokes now leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes locked on her. The colonel whispered, almost to himself, "She's keeping them alive with nothing but her voice." Another urgent call crackled through. "Trident Actual, enemy vehicle, mounted PKM North Ridge." Nora didn't miss a beat. "Copy, vehicle North Ridge. Adjust fire, grid 22,961. Fire for effect." The artillery roared, the blast tore the ridge, the vehicle fell silent. "Target destroyed." "Good copy," came the SEAL commander's reply, voice flat, edged with respect now. Nora tightened her grip on the handset, pulse steady. She felt the shift. They trusted her, not because of who she was, not because of rank, but because she had given them order in chaos. In less than 30 minutes, the Clerk had become the lifeline. But the battle wasn't over. The valley wasn't done testing her. And the next trial wouldn't come from the ridges. It would come from the voices she was never meant to understand. Because as the artillery echoed and the valley reeled, new chatter bled across the net. Not English, not codes, a garbled mix of Pashto and static, sharp and quick. The linguist assigned to the shift wasn't there. Confusion rippled through the TOC. "What the hell are they saying?" an officer snapped. Only one person knew. Nora lifted the mic, eyes steady, and spoke a sharp phrase in accented Pashto, clear, commanding. The enemy chatter cut off instantly. The sergeant gaped, "What did you just say?" She didn't answer, she didn't need to. She keyed up again. "Trident Actual, threat comms disrupted. Continue west. I'll walk fire ahead." The room had no idea how she had learned those words. That she had whispered them at night, practicing with interpreters, tucking them away like hidden blades. Now they weren't just words, they were weapons. And the enemy went silent. The doubts in the TOC had nowhere left to hide. Someone muttered again, weaker this time, "She's just a clerk." But no one agreed. Not anymore. Because in that moment, it was undeniable. The smallest, quietest soldier in the room was holding the battle together. And the SEALs, all 361 of them, clung to her voice as if it were the only thing keeping them alive. What happens when the machines go silent? The TOC buzzed with tense energy, every console glowing, every officer leaning forward as though proximity could bend reality in the valley. The artillery still thundered, Nora's corrections landing with eerie precision. The SEALs clung to her voice like a rope in storm water. And then, suddenly, the screens went black. The GPS overlays froze, then vanished. The digital system that tracked friendlies, enemies, grids, the one every officer in the room trusted more than their own eyes, gone in a blink. A ripple of panic cut through the TOC. "We lost digital feeds," a staff sergeant barked. "We can't track grids without them." Eyes snapped toward the colonel, but he had no answer. Maps scattered, officers fumbling for bearings like men drowning in paper. But Nora had been waiting for this moment all her life. She didn't curse, didn't hesitate. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small notebook she carried everywhere. Pages crammed with pencil lines, ridges sketched from memory, grids annotated like diary entries. She flipped to the one that mattered. Her thumb pressed the transmit key. "Trident standby, I have your coordinates. You are at grid 29,574. Confirm." Static hissed, then came the reply, "Confirmed, that's us." The staff stared. She didn't need the system. She carried the map in her head. Every contour traced in silence, every fold rehearsed until it lived in muscle memory. She was making calls faster than the machines ever had. For a moment, the room fell utterly still. Pens hung frozen above paper. Officers who had dismissed her leaned in closer, as though proximity could explain what they were seeing. But the valley wasn't about to give her rest. A young voice bled through the net again, trembling. "This is Trident 2. We can't move, we're cut off." Nora recognized the crack of fear instantly. Panic was contagious. One voice breaking could unravel the entire line. "They're closing in," the SEAL stammered. "We're out of ammo, we can't." Nora cut him off, low and calm. "Trident 2, breathe." Heavy breathing filled the net. "Say again slowly, I have you." The pause stretched, then steadied. "Pin north slope, 2 enemy squads. Grid 229,582. "Solid copy," she replied, tone flat, unshaken. "Hold position. I'm walking fire uphill ahead of you. Stay low, you're not alone." Her voice never cracked. Her breathing never spiked. She had practiced this rhythm since childhood, slowing her lungs until others followed suit. "Shift 10 north, fire. Shift 20 more, fire." Each detonation in the valley matched her words. The net steadied. The young officer's voice returned, firmer. "Copy. We're moving, thank you." Nora didn't answer. She just kept guiding fire. The TOC watched in reverent silence. Even the sergeant who had mocked her with stapler jokes sat frozen, elbows braced on his knees, watching her like he was seeing doctrine rewritten in real time. The colonel whispered almost to himself, "She's keeping them alive with nothing but her voice." But the valley had more claws to bear. Another urgent call split the static. "Enemy vehicle, North Ridge, mounted PKM." Nora keyed the mic without pause. "Copy. Vehicle North Ridge. Adjust fire, grid 22,961. Fire for effect." The howitzers answered with a roar. The ridge split open. The vehicle fell silent. "Target destroyed. Good copy." The SEAL commander's voice came back, flat but edged with something new. "Respect." Nora didn't smile. She didn't let relief show. Her grip on the handset only tightened. because she knew this wasn't over. She thought again of her father's warning years ago, standing by their small house in Texas. One day you'll carry something too heavy. She hadn't believed him. She believed him now. Every voice in the valley pressed on her chest like a stone. Every man waiting on her next words felt heavier than the last. And then new chatter cut into the net. Not English, not brevity codes. Pashto, fast and sharp, bleeding through the static. Confusion rippled through the TOC. What are they saying? An officer snapped. The assigned linguist wasn't there. Only Nora understood. She lifted the mic again, her voice snapping in accented Pashto, a sharp phrase commanding, not pleading. The enemy chatter cut off instantly. The sergeant who had mocked her gaped. What did you just say? Nora didn't answer. She didn't need to. She pressed the key again. Trident Actual, threat comms disrupted. Continue west. I'll walk fire ahead. No one in the room had known she'd been learning phrases for months, that she'd whispered them late at night, testing each syllable against her tongue until they felt like her own. Now they weren't just words, they were weapons. And the enemy went silent. The officers exchanged glances, shaken. The major muttered, voice thinner now, she's just a clerk. But even he didn't believe it anymore. The truth was undeniable. The smallest, quietest soldier in the room was the one holding the valley together. And the SEALs, every one of them, moved when she told them to move, breathed when she told them to breathe. Still, Nora's chest burned with the weight. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to carry this. She thought of the papers waiting on her desk, the unfiled forms, the ribbons she would never wear. She wondered, for one brief heartbeat, if the world would ever know what she carried tonight. Then the next call crackled through. East Ridge, multiple RPGs, less than 50 meters, we can't. The air officer shook his head. No shot, too danger close, they'll be overrun. A lieutenant muttered, already defeated, we'll lose them. Nora closed her eyes for half a breath. She saw the ridge in her mind, the way it bent like a crooked finger. She saw the strobes, the folds she had memorized under lamplight. She pressed the key. Trident Actual, danger close fire mission 50 meters, confirm IR marker on friendlies. The net went silent. Then the SEAL commander's voice, tight but steady. Marker lit, do it. The fire support officer nearly shouted. She can't, 50 meters is suicide. But the rounds were already in the air. The valley erupted. A line of explosions stitched across the ridge, shaving stone, chewing dirt, but never touching the strobes. The TOC went silent for 3 long seconds. No one breathed. Then the commander came back. Good effect, ridge clear, corridor holding. The silence that followed was different now. Not disbelief, not doubt, something heavier, something close to awe. Nora kept her eyes forward, voice steady, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside, a war raged. She had crossed a line, danger close at 50 meters, a call even seasoned JTACs feared to make. One slip and she would have killed the very men she was trying to save. Her heart hammered, but her voice never showed it. She couldn't afford to. And so, while officers whispered behind her, while the TOC stared like they were seeing a ghost, she pressed the key again. Trident, push 2 teams west under my fire. Stay below the rock lip. I'm walking rounds uphill ahead of you. The reply came back, ragged but steady. Copy, moving. And with every bound, every correction, every word, the clerk no one had noticed before became the lifeline of 361 men. Not with a rifle, not with rank, but with nothing more than a steady voice on a broken net. How many times could she gamble with death before it claimed her? The TOC was quieter now, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that trembled on the edge of awe and disbelief. The clerks, the officers, the sergeants who had laughed at her an hour ago now leaned forward, notebooks abandoned, listening for her every word. On the net, chaos still howled. Gunfire stitched the ridges, mortars thudded in merciless rhythm. The valley was a coffin being nailed shut from every side. And Nora Reyes was the only one keeping it from closing. Trident Actual, confirmed nearest enemy contact. Static, then a reply ragged and breaking. East Ridge, multiple RPG teams less than 50 meters, we can't hold. The air officer slammed a fist against the table. No shot, too close, they're gone. Nora exhaled once, slow. In her mind she walked the fold of the ridge, tracing the line like a finger across a page. She had seen this place 100 times in her head, in drawings no one had noticed, in maps scribbled under dim light when others slept. Her thumb pressed the key. Trident Actual, danger close fire mission, 50 meters, confirm IR marker on friendlies. Silence. Then the commander's voice, tight but trusting. Marker lit, do it. The fire support officer nearly shouted. She'll kill them, 50 meters is suicide. But the shells were already inbound. The valley erupted. A line of fire stitched across the ridge, dirt and stone exploding in sheets. For 3 long seconds the net went dead. Then the commander came back. Good effect, ridge clear, corridor holding. The TOC froze in disbelief. No one mocked her now. No one breathed too loudly. The clerk had walked artillery within 50 meters of friendlies and pulled them through without a scratch. But Nora didn't allow herself triumph. Not yet, because she knew valleys like this. She knew battles didn't stop just because one ridge fell silent. And she was right. A frantic voice cut through the static. Trident 2, we're overrun, they're on top of us. The tone was pure panic, the kind that could unravel an entire corridor if it spread. Nora keyed up instantly. Her voice dropped low, almost gentle. Trident 2, breathe, say again slowly. Nothing but gasps, she pressed harder. You are not alone, say again. The voice steadied just barely. North slope, 2 squads closing fast, we can't. Solid copy, she cut in. Shift fire uphill, 10 meters, fire, 20 more, fire. Each correction carved breathing space for the pinned element. Each word gave them one more chance to crawl, one more second of life. The young officer's voice steadied. We're moving, copy, thank you. Nora didn't answer. She never said you're welcome. She never let the silence hang. She just kept the net alive, voice steady, pulse hammering, mind locked on the valley she had memorized like scripture. Behind her, the sergeant who had once joked about staplers now leaned forward, eyes locked, lips pressed tight. The colonel's throat worked like he was swallowing words he couldn't yet speak. And Nora, she only heard the net, only the voices depending on her. But inside her chest, the weight grew unbearable. 361 lives balanced on her tongue. One wrong correction, one slip of breath, one heartbeat too fast, and she would bury men alive. She had never carried weight like this. Not in her studies, not in her secret rehearsals, not in the moments she fixed radios as a joke. This was real. And in the cracks between calls, her own fear began to whisper. What if you're wrong? What if the next correction misses? What if this is the moment your father warned you about, the day you carried something too heavy? She clenched her jaw. She couldn't show it, couldn't let the tremor inside her chest bleed into her voice. The SEALs didn't need her fear. They needed her calm. She pressed the key again, burying doubt under words. Trident Actual, push 3 elements west under my fire. Stay tight to the rock. I'm walking rounds ahead. Copy, moving. The howitzers thundered, the SEALs moved, and the corridor inched open, meter by bloody meter. But the valley wasn't finished. New static tore across the net, enemy chatter bleeding through. Pashto phrases barked sharp, urgent. The linguist wasn't on shift. The officers cursed, helpless. Nora lifted the mic again, her Pashto cutting clean through. A phrase she had practiced in silence, whispered to herself until it became hers. The enemy chatter cut off instantly. The sergeant who had mocked her earlier gaped. "What the hell did you just say?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She keyed again, calm. Trident Actual, threat comms disrupted. "Continue, I have you." The TOC had no idea she'd spent nights with interpreters, trading coffee for words, rehearsing phrases no one thought she'd need. But she needed them now, and she wielded them like blades. For the first time, the TOC began to see her not as background but as the center of gravity. Their disbelief shifted into something else, heavier, undeniable. Respect. Still, Nora didn't let it touch her. She didn't look for it. She couldn't afford to. Because just as quickly, another desperate call bled through. "Trident Actual, we can't move. Pinned, we're running out." Her thumb pressed the key steady. "Hold, you're not alone. Shift fire 20 north, fire." The valley thundered again. The net steadied. Her voice carried them forward. But inside, Nora knew the truth. She wasn't just carrying the seals. She was carrying herself, holding back her own fear, her own doubt, her own exhaustion. And she knew if she faltered, if she let one tremor into her words, the whole line could break. The battle had become more than survival. It had become a test of her very soul. And the night wasn't done testing her yet. How could one voice sound familiar in the middle of chaos? The net crackled with overlapping calls. Gunfire chewed the ridges, mortars shook the valley, and still Nora Reyes held the handset steady, thumb pressed lightly on the key, voice never breaking. "Trident, adjust fire 20 north. Break, hold, stand by for next correction." Her cadence was clipped precise, every syllable cut clean. On the ground, the seals moved like shadows, slipping between blasts she guided with nothing but words. In the TOC, men who had laughed at her hours ago leaned forward in silence, pencils snapping in fists, eyes pinned on her lips as if each breath mattered more than the artillery itself. And then, for the first time, the SEAL commander on the ground paused before answering. "Copy, Rays will hold." His voice was ragged, but beneath it was something else, recognition. He knew voices. He had lived too many nights in too many valleys not to remember the ones that saved him. He keyed again, softer this time. "Specialist, what's your first name?" Nora froze for half a second. The room stiffened. Questions like that weren't asked on the net, not in the middle of fire, not when seconds meant lives. But she answered anyway, "Nora." A pause stretched across the static. Then the commander whispered, almost to himself but still audible, "I've heard you before." The TOC exchanged sharp looks. The colonel's brow furrowed, but Nora said nothing. She didn't have time to explain. Because the valley wasn't pausing for recognition. "Trident Actual, enemy massing West Ridge, 50 meters, we're pinned." Nora keyed instantly. "Copy, suppressing, adjust fire left 20, fire, drop 10, fire." The howitzers thundered, the ridge shook, the enemy advance faltered. The commander's voice came back steadier now. "Good copy, ridge suppressed, corridor holding." But when he spoke again, his tone carried weight. "Nora, you were there in Cunnar, weren't you?" The words hit her chest like a round. For a heartbeat, she almost lost breath. Cunnar, 2014. A night that still lived in her bones. Radios failing. A team surrounded. She'd been sent along as admin support, forgotten in the corner until the comm sergeant went down. She had picked up the handset then, just as she had tonight, and carried men through fire with nothing but words. She had never told anyone. She had buried it, convinced it would vanish in silence like everything else she did. But he remembered. Her hand tightened on the mic. "Trident Actual, stay on task. Confirm current position." The commander's voice came back clipped, but a note of reverence bled through. "Confirmed. Moving, but I know your voice." Nora shut her eyes for 1 second. She couldn't let the past surface now, not when the present was clawing at her throat. She buried it, pressed the key, and kept going. "Shift fire uphill, 10 north, fire." The shells answered, the seals moved. But in the TOC, whispers spread. "Cunnar, what's he talking about?" The sergeant who had mocked her shook his head slowly, disbelief giving way to something heavier. Respect, maybe even shame. The colonel said nothing. His eyes never left her. The battle raged on. Enemy fire clawed closer, voices bled with panic, and Nora's calm carried them through each correction, each bound. But now, alongside survival, another thread ran through the net. Recognition. The commander had not forgotten her. The one night when silence nearly swallowed them, she had been the steady voice pulling them out. He hadn't known her name then. Only the tone. Only the cadence that refused to let panic take root. And now, years later, in another valley designed to bury men alive, that same voice had risen again. The realization spread like electricity through the TOC. They weren't just witnessing a miracle. They were witnessing a return. Still, Nora refused to acknowledge it. She couldn't. Not yet. Because the valley was still alive, and until every man walked out, she had no room for recognition, no space for reverence. She pressed the key again. "Trident, push element 3 west under my fire. Stay tight to the rock. Confirm IR marker lit." Marker lit, copy, moving. Explosions rolled across the ridge. The corridor widened. Inside, Nora's heart hammered with a rhythm she couldn't share. She thought of the tattoo inked faintly on her wrist, hidden beneath her sleeve, a radio tower and a string of numbers, a memory of that night in Cunnar she had sworn to keep to herself. She wondered if the commander remembered those numbers too. But she didn't let the thought linger. She didn't let it pull her from the present. Because the voices in her ear still needed her. And tonight, just like years ago, she refused to let silence win. How long could she keep hiding in plain sight? The TOC buzzed with quiet disbelief. The SEAL commander's voice still echoed in the air. "I've heard you before." Men shifted in their seats. Officers scribbled half-hearted notes, but everyone's eyes stayed fixed on her. The clerk, who wasn't supposed to know anything, who had been dismissed as background noise, was rewriting the meaning of the net with every call. And still outside, the valley howled. "Trident Actual, contact North Slope, RPG teams advancing, less than 80 meters. Nora keyed the mic without hesitation. "Copy. Adjust fire grid 229,581, shift 20 north, fire." The howitzers thundered, shaking the TOC walls. A beat later, the SEAL commander's voice returned. "Good copy. Enemy suppressed." His tone had changed. It wasn't just reporting anymore. It carried something heavier, a weight the others in the TOC couldn't quite name. But Nora knew. He remembered Cunnar. She clenched her jaw, pressing the memory back down. She couldn't afford it now. Not with 361 men in her hands. "Trident 2, move west under my fire, stay below the ridge lip. Confirm when in position." "Copy, moving." Her voice was steel, but inside, doubt whispered sharp. "How many times can you do this before one correction is wrong? How long before your luck runs out?" She exhaled slow. She had to trust the hours no one saw, the nights sketching maps until her pencil broke, the whispered brevity codes when the barracks were silent, the stolen Pashto phrases mouthed until they felt like her own. This wasn't luck, it was preparation, paid for in loneliness. Another call bled through the net, younger, shaky. "Trident 3, we can't see, smoke too thick, we're blind." Panic again, it could spread like fire. Nora keyed up. "Trident 3, you don't need eyes, you have me. Hold, shift fire north 15. Fire, shift 20 more, fire." The valley shook, the net steadied. The voice came back, calmer now. "Copy, good effect, moving." She didn't smile, she didn't breathe relief, she just kept going. But in the silence between calls, the SEAL commander's voice returned, steady, deliberate. "You were the one in Cunnar. I never forgot your tone." The words weren't just recognition, they were testimony. The TOC rippled with unease. The colonel's eyes narrowed. The sergeant who had mocked her bowed his head slightly, lips pressed tight. They all knew something was shifting. But Nora didn't acknowledge it, couldn't. Trident Actual confirm grid. Grid 229,590. Solid copy, hold position, walking fire ahead. Her voice stayed clipped calm, but inside her chest burned, because part of her wanted to answer him, part of her wanted to say, yes, I was there. I carried you then just like I'm carrying you now. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not until every man was out. The battle raged on. Enemy fire poured from the slopes. Mortars punched dirt, spraying shrapnel across shallow cover. SEALs crawled forward meter by meter, guided by her voice alone. And then, as if the valley itself wanted to test her resolve, the net split into overlapping chaos. Trident 1, ammo low. Trident 2, were flanked. Trident Actual, casualties mounting. Voices crashed together. Panic threatened to swallow order. Nora pressed the key, voice cutting through like a scalpel. All Trident elements, break, one at a time, Actual first. The net obeyed, not because of rank, not because of orders, but because her voice had earned trust. Trident Actual, state position. Static then, West Ridge fold holding 5 casualties, ammo critical. Solid copy, hold Trident 2 state. They answered, then 3, then 4. In 30 seconds, she had re-established order the way senior officers sometimes couldn't. The TOC stared. The colonel whispered to no one in particular, she's running their battle. But Nora didn't think of it that way. She wasn't running anything. She was holding it together with threads, fragile, breakable threads, and if she let one slip, if she faltered for even a second, it would all collapse. Her thumb ached from pressing the key. Her throat burned from the constant steadiness, but she didn't let it show. Trident shift fire uphill, move 2 elements west, confirm when set. Copy moving. Explosions rolled across the ridges. The SEALs crawled forward again. And then once more, the commander spoke. His voice softer but carrying across the net like a stone dropped in still water. Specialist Rays, you kept us alive once before. Don't think I'll ever forget it. The room went silent. No one dared whisper. No one dared laugh. The colonel's face tightened, realization dawning. The sergeant who had once mocked her lowered his eyes. The officers shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, as though shame had settled heavy across their shoulders. Because the truth was undeniable now. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't lucky. She had done this before, and she was doing it again. Nora swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady as she keyed up again. Trident Actual, corridor opening, push 2 teams through. Stay tight to the rock, I'll keep fire ahead. Copy moving. The battle still raged, but the shift was complete. In the TOC, there were no smirks anymore. No laughter. Only silence, heavy and reverent, as the smallest soldier in the room held the weight of hundreds with nothing but her voice. And in the valley, the SEAL commander carried the secret no one else yet knew. That this wasn't the first time Nora Rays had pulled men back from the edge of silence. It was the second. And this time, the world would remember. Why did the room go so still? The projector hummed softly, throwing pale light across the after-action review room. Men leaned forward in their seats, no longer smirking, no longer whispering. They listened now, every breath caught in the weight of what they were hearing. Specialist Nora Rays stood at the front, uniform pressed, folder in hand, her voice steady as she walked through each fire mission she had called. Every correction, every clipped command, every second of calm that had held 361 lives above the grave. She wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't demanding credit. She spoke the same way she had on the net, precise, measured, grounded. But then, as she lifted her arm to gesture at the ridgeline displayed on the map, her sleeve slid back just an inch. A tattoo, faint but sharp, inked on the inside of her left wrist. A radio tower, beneath it a string of numbers. A murmur rippled through the room. One of the senior SEAL commanders leaned forward, eyes locked on her wrist. His breath caught. He had seen that symbol before years earlier in a valley half a world away. Cunnar 2014. A night when radios had failed, when chaos had swallowed the net, when his team had been certain death was closing in. And then a voice, calm, clear, deliberate, had cut through the static and carried them out, grid by grid, until the impossible became survival. The filing clerk, they had called her after, attached for admin, forgotten until the moment she picked up the handset. He had never forgotten the tone, and he had never forgotten those numbers. He stood slowly, the scrape of his chair against tile loud in the silence. Every head turned. Nora stiffened, eyes flicking from him to the colonel, uncertain. The commander stepped closer, boots heavy on the floor, and stopped in front of her. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at her wrist, then at her face. Finally, his voice carried low, steady. "You kept us alive once before." The words dropped like stones into still water. A murmur rippled again. The men in the room turned, whispers darting between them. "Cunnar, he knows her. This isn't the first time." The commander's voice rose, louder now, carrying to the far wall. "You were there in Cunnar. You were the one on the net when we thought we'd never get out." Nora opened her mouth, then closed it. She had never expected to be recognized, never expected anyone to connect the quiet clerk with that night. She stood frozen, the truth pressing down on her chest. The commander didn't wait for her answer. He raised his hand slowly, deliberately, and saluted. The room froze. Every Marine, every SEAL, every soldier went silent. The sergeant who had once joked about staplers stared at the floor. The captains who had dismissed her as background noise stopped breathing. The colonel's throat tightened, his hands trembling at his sides. For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly, almost reverently, the colonel rose. His boots scraped against tile as he came to his feet and mirrored the salute. One by one, chairs scraped back, boots planted against the floor, and the entire room rose in unison. 100 hands lifted to brows. 100 faces that had once smirked now turned forward, rigid with respect. The silence was overwhelming, heavy, sacred. Nora's eyes burned, but she did not cry. She returned the salute with the same quiet strength she had carried in the valley, the same steadiness that had kept her voice unbroken when every other voice had cracked. The commander's voice broke the silence. 361 men walked out alive because you refused to stay silent, because you refused to be just a clerk. The words struck harder than artillery. Men who had mocked her earlier bowed their heads, unable to meet her gaze. The room that had started with laughter was now drenched in silence so deep it felt like a prayer. The colonel's own voice followed, softer but carrying to every corner. "Rank does not define courage. Job titles do not decide who holds the line. And when the radios fell silent, you refused to." Not a stiff speech, not ceremony, just truth. The room shifted. The smirks had vanished forever. The dismissals burned away in shame. And what remained was reverence. For the smallest, quietest soldier in the room. For the clerk who had refused to let silence win. When the last salute lowered, the silence didn't fade. It lingered thick, sacred, almost unbearable. The kind of silence that said more than words ever could. Nora Reyes stood at the front, hands folded over her notes, posture steady. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't wanted it. She had only done what had to be done. But now the weight of it pressed on her in a way even the valley hadn't. The commander's words still echoed. 361 walked out alive because you refused to stay silent. The colonel cleared his throat, voice rough as though fighting to stay even. "Specialist Reyes, today you taught this room something we should have already known. Courage doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wear rank. It simply acts." Not one officer argued. Not one sergeant smirked. They all knew he was right. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The men who had laughed were now still, their eyes down, their shame heavy. The men who had doubted her now bowed their heads as though respect itself had weight. And Nora, she didn't bask in it, she didn't lean into their awe. She only returned the salute once more, steady, sure. Then she cleared her throat softly and spoke the only words she felt were true. I just did what had to be done. Her voice didn't waver. She didn't claim heroism. She didn't wrap herself in pride. She didn't reach for glory. She only named the truth as she saw it, that silence would have killed them, and she refused to let silence win. The room stayed quiet, her words heavier than any speech. And then slowly, life moved again. Chairs scraped back, boots shuffled against tile. Officers whispered to one another in hushed tones, but the laughter never returned. The mocking was gone. Something deeper had taken its place. Respect. Not the kind painted in medals. Not the kind shouted in parades. The kind carried in silence, in the way men stood taller when she passed, the way voices lowered when she entered, the way her name spread in whispers instead of jokes. In the days that followed, she returned to her desk, back to stacks of forms, ribbons typed onto certificates, signatures rooted through inboxes, back to the life where no one looked twice. But now, when soldiers passed by her office door, they didn't see background noise. They didn't see the quiet clerk in pressed sleeves and ink stains. They saw something else. The voice that had steadied a valley. The strength that had turned static into survival. The calm that had kept 361 alive when chaos tried to bury them. No medal marked her chest. No headlines spoke her name. But her legacy lived anyway, not in ink, not in records, but in the men who had walked out alive. And in the ones who had once laughed, who now lowered their eyes when they thought of her. The sergeant who had joked the loudest stopped by her office one day. He didn't bring paperwork. He didn't bring excuses. He only stood in the doorway, eyes heavy, and said softly, "You were more soldier than any of us that day." Then he left, no more words, none were needed. Nora didn't chase respect. She didn't need applause. She returned to her quiet work, steady as ever. But in the shadows of barracks and briefing halls, in the whispers that soldiers carry like prayer, her name lived on. Rays held the net. She didn't break. She kept 361 alive with nothing but her voice. And when her story was retold, as stories always are, it wasn't dressed in exaggeration. It didn't need to be. Because the truth was enough. That a clerk, forgotten in the corner, had carried men through fire when every system failed. That she had steadied the net with nothing but her breath, her patience, and her refusal to let fear dictate her words. That courage doesn't always come from the loudest voice, or the highest rank, or the strongest hand. Sometimes courage is quiet. Sometimes it waits until the valley turns black, until chaos roars, until silence threatens to bury everyone. And then it speaks. Steady, unshaken, certain. Nora Rays never sought the title of hero. She never asked for recognition. She never demanded a place in stories. But stories found her anyway. Because the men who walked out alive could never forget. And the men who once laughed could never smirk again. When we think of heroes, we picture soldiers charging with rifles raised, pilots diving through fire, warriors carrying scars across their skin. But sometimes the truest courage looks different. Sometimes it wears pressed sleeves and ink stains. Sometimes it is invisible until the moment it is needed most. Sometimes it is nothing more than a calm voice on a broken net. And sometimes that is enough to change everything. 361 men walked out alive because specialist Nora Rays refused to stay silent. And in the end, perhaps that is the purest kind of legacy. Not written in medals, not carved in stone, but remembered in whispers, respected in silence, and carried forever in the breath of those who survived. because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.